nice to have you all here. It's a special pleasure to have Senator Klobuchar, Congressman Emmer, and this panel of what I know to be dedicated humanitarians. So thank you all for coming out. Thank you all for joining us. The world, as we know, is confronted by a whole bunch of really complicated problems right now. We have a global refugee crisis that's ongoing. We have 63 million people who have lost their homes and are looking for some kind of safe place to live and build a life. We're also confronted by, really an unprecedented drought and famine across 4 countries, Nigeria, Yemen, South Sudan, and Somalia. Today, over 60 million people affected by this. And that's not even mentioning the countries that surround those countries that are affected by that crisis. However, for us here in Minnesota, Somalia is particularly close to our hearts. We have many of our own community that have family members that are living in the regions that are affected by this drought. So it's a very real thing for all of us. I would also like to recognize that in this room, not just on this panel, but actually sitting in the audience, we have some remarkable people and some organizations that have been very dedicated to this issue for a long time. I'd particularly like to recognize 2 of my friends who are here, Abdurizak and Mohammed. Actually, both of these gentlemen were very involved with us, and we had the pleasure of working their dedication greatly. I would like to take this opportunity to assure the Somali American community and the Somali Minnesotan community in particular that we are doing what I hope you would expect us to do. That we are working across all of Somalia today, from Somaliland to Puntland, Mogadishu, Lower Juba, and into the Bay region. And we are responding to the drought. And I mean this as of today. In the last month, we have delivered over 1 million gallons of clean water into those regions, 3,500 tons of food, and 60 tons of plant food to the malnourished in almost every region of that country. Again, that's just in the last month. I also want to assure you that while we are using funding that is coming from the donations made by people like you, people here in the Twin Cities, we have also received funding from the US government, your government, through USAID to respond to this drought. And that's just recent. I want to thank Senator Klobuchar and Congressman Emmer for their efforts to ensure that this important work continues. Their presence here is ample proof of the unifying values, not only of generosity and compassion, but also the straightforward, pragmatic thinking and problem solving that lie at the heart of the American people. American leadership, as always, is critically needed around the world today, and we are very lucky in Minnesota to have both of them leading us. It's my special pleasure to introduce a fellow Trojan, Senator Klobuchar. Since her election in 2006, the Senator has made a point to bring people together to find workable solutions to some tough problems. This has earned her the distinction last year of having the most bills of any senator signed into law. She has been a leader on issues important to our state, from support to veterans to justice for victims of trafficking. And she has continually spearheaded efforts in Washington on pressing foreign relations issues. She's been a real champion for Somalia. She has been a champion for East Africa. And right now she is a champion around this family.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, everyone. It is wonderful to be here at this important place with so many experts, and I think there are many people in this room that right now have relatives and friends that are right in the middle of this. And it's hard to imagine right now on a rainy Minnesota day, but we literally have 6 million people in Somalia, about half the population, that are subject to this drought and famine. And we all know that if we don't respond, and we don't respond as a world, that many people will die. We know that because not that long ago, over 200,000 people died back in 2011 when they had the last famine. That's in one country. Imagine, that's almost the population of Minneapolis right there. So thank you to the American Refugee Committee, for my friend Congressman Emmer, who is always bucking the trends and being willing to come out and speak courageously on some issues that aren't always easy to talk about. He's one of the leaders with me on the Cuba bill. He leads it in the House, opening relations with Cuba, and he's also been the co-chair of the Somali caucus in the House of Representatives, and has been willing to work across party lines on this really important issue. I think when you have a child dying because of a drought, I don't think they ask, could I have a Democrat help me, or could I have a Republican help me? They just ask for help, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Recurring drought means that farmers can't harvest and livestock can't graze, there's no water, and people die of hunger. Examples, Farumata, a young mom from Mogadishu, was forced to walk more than 100 miles in search of food and water. A widow with 5 children fled to Hargeisa seeking help. Her son, just 9 years old, was admitted to the local hospital for severely malnourished children. He is one of millions of malnourished children in that region. Last month, Somalia's prime minister announced 110 people died from starvation in a 48-hour period, and the number is increasing as we speak. The UN has warned that the current drought represents the largest humanitarian crisis the UN has seen since it was founded in 1945. But it's not really on the front pages of the newspaper or on Lita on TV right now, and that's why this is such an important meeting. The United States Agency for International Aid has reported that nearly 15 million people in Somalia and Ethiopia are in need of immediate assistance. Famine has already been declared, as Daniel pointed out, in South Sudan, and the International Rescue Committee has issued an alert that famine is imminent in Somalia. As I mentioned, 6.2 million people, more than half of Somalia's estimated population, are projected to experience acute food insecurity through at least June of 2017. And according to UNICEF, more than 40 million people, including 20 million children, are at risk across the region. So the situation is dire, and that's why it is so important, with so many Minnesotans having friends and relatives in places from Ethiopia to Somalia to Sudan, that we step up. We know that a strong military is incredibly important for our country, but we also know there are ways that we can help that can save lives and make friends. We have private partners in this effort. That's why Cargill is here. I remember visiting the baby food place, manufacturing company in Ethiopia, which President Obama later visited, Fafa Foods, right? That they and General Mills have been major investors in and helped to create more nutritious baby food, not only for Ethiopian children and Oromo children, but for children throughout the region. And so this kind of private-public partnership is going to be really important. Representative Emmer and I recently called on the President not to make these major cuts to international assistance, noting especially this famine in the Horn of Africa. And people should know that the humanitarian aid part of our U.S. budget is less than 1% of the United States budget. I think sometimes it's so much more than that. It is less than 1%. One of the biggest mistakes that happened back in 2011, when 260,000 lives were lost, is that assistance came, but it came too late. In 2014, 3 years after the 2011 famine, when I went to these countries like Ethiopia and Tanzania, we talked about that and how important it is to be there on the front line right away. People often ask how they can help. Well, in Minnesota alone, in addition to helping the American Refugee Committee, people can volunteer. Kids Against Hunger in Mankato. I remember back in 2011 we worked to pack meals up to send to Somalia. We packed 1,000 meals a day. A group of 60 local restaurants recently came together to start Dine Out for Somalia, committing to donate profits and raise more than $150,000 for famine relief. The nonprofit Feed My Starving Children, based in Coon Rapids, announced that it is going to provide 10 million meals to Somalia, 6 times the number of meals that they provided last year. The American Relief Agency for the Horn of Africa, also with us here today, has set a goal of raising $500,000 to provide wells and food baskets for those affected by drought. Local college students like Khalid Mohammed and Laban Adam, along with a group of their friends, raised more than $60,000 through a social media campaign, and they're continuing to raise more. Those are just some examples. So we look at this, of course, as part of our greater work to help refugees. And the best way to help refugees is to make sure they're not refugees in the first place, so that they can stay in their country. And that's a lot about what we're going to be talking about today. Our Representative Emmer and I and the rest of our delegation expressed serious concerns back last year to Secretary Kerry about the Kenyan government's plans to close the biggest refugee camp for Somalians. Right now that is not yet closed, and so we're continuing to advocate there. So this is all intertwined, but what we know now is something that no one really caused. Well, maybe a little climate change caused it, so we won't go into that. But that is the famine that we're facing in this country. And now the question is not who caused it, the question is how do we respond to it? And that's what we're here to talk about today. So I want to thank you. And I also will turn this over to my colleague. As I mentioned, Representative Emmer has now been in Congress for how long? 3 years.
My hair was dark when I started.
And he's been a real leader on some of these international issues, which are so much at the heart of Minnesota, the heart of our religious community, and I appreciate him being here with us today, Representative Emmer.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to thank Senator Klobuchar not only for the introduction and the invitation to be here today, but for organizing this event. And I want to thank the American Refugee Committee and Daniel for hosting this very important and timely event. Nearly 1 in 3 Somali Americans in the United States lives right here in Minnesota. They're members of our community, they're business owners, they're school teachers, family members, and they're our friends. So when we see more than 6 million people suffering in Somalia from what could be one of the worst famines in the country's history, it's not just a crisis that affects strangers from a foreign nation over 8,000 miles away. It's a crisis that affects us right here in our communities across Minnesota. Tragic events like this do not just take a toll on human life. They can negatively impact the regional stability and long-term development of an entire continent. In February, the Somali people elected a new president, Mohamed Abdullahi, better known as Farmajo. As a country, Somalia has given us hope and optimism for its future, and this optimism is something we can't afford to lose. More importantly, this is something that the region can't afford to lose. Simply put, the United States can't afford to disengage from this crisis. Fortunately, Minnesota has shown time and again that it is willing and able to support growth and development in Somalia. The panelists we have here today are examples of some of the important work that's being done. Well-known Minnesotans like our friend Ward Brem and others have helped to lead the charge working with the United States African Development Foundation to coordinate and further relief and development efforts in Somalia and throughout the continent of Africa. Minnesota-based companies like General Mills and Land O'Lakes have donated tens of thousands of dollars and established numerous programs to encourage economic development and sustainability directly in Somalia and throughout Africa. In fact, there are too many Minnesotans and Minnesota businesses and organizations to mention. that deserve recognition for their work in delivering medical supplies, food, educational materials, and other forms of support to those areas of need. Today, I'm looking forward to learning more from this panel about what's happening in Somalia and the efforts that are currently being taken to address the crisis and what steps need to be taken to provide the stability and relief that is so desperately needed. I recognize that much of the aid and support necessary can't be provided without appropriate funding, which is why, as Senator Klobuchar already mentioned, Amy and I recently sent a letter to the President expressing our joint concern with his proposed budget cuts in foreign aid. Washington has many difficult choices to make when it comes to reining in our ever-growing national debt and our deficit. There's no denying this reality. However, I don't believe our financial issues can or should be solved solely on the backs of our foreign aid and assistance programs. A proposed 31% reduction to these accounts would tie the hands of many important programs that not only further humanitarian relief efforts, but also complement our work to combat the spread of terrorism and promote regional and national security. Terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab have demonstrated a history of capitalizing on these types of crises, and we can't afford to allow that to be the case today. This is not a bipartisan issue. This is a nonpartisan issue, and I look forward to continuing to work with Senator Klobuchar and my colleagues in the House and Senate to provide the necessary funding to support these programs, but also to identify ways to improve and streamline the delivery of aid. Additionally, as a member of the House Financial Services Committee's newest subcommittee on terrorism and illicit finance, I'm interested in hearing from our panelists here today about the efforts currently underway to prevent our foreign aid dollars from falling into the hands of those who threaten our security, not only the security of the people that we're trying to help, but our security, and what steps we should take to ensure that these funds get to where they are needed most. This is an immensely important and complex issue, and I want to thank all of the panelists again for joining us today, and I look forward to learning more about what you're hearing from your colleagues with the on-the-ground knowledge about the state of the drought and famine in Somalia and across the Horn of Africa, and what we as Minnesotans and Americans can do to help. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Tom. And I think a little less echo, maybe. Let's see. We have some great panelists here, and we're going to start with Mohamed. Mohamed Idris is the Executive Director of the American Relief Agency for the Horn of Africa. So let's hear a few words. And I know your organization does amazing work and provide food assistance. And so you want to talk a little bit about that, the work you do.
Thank you, Senator Amy Klobuchar and Representative Tom Emmer, and thank you, Daniel, for hosting us in this important press conference to raise awareness about the famine conditions in Somalia and the Horn of Africa region. At the beginning, I would like to for those who do not know, ARAHA is a humanitarian organization based in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, and we are, for the last 15 years, we have been delivering life essential for those in need in East Africa. We also help families break the cycle of poverty by developing opportunities for them to generate an income and educate their children. We launched our campaign in 2016. This is going on for 2 consecutive seasons. So because we are in ground, we have been seeing the impact on the people since the beginning of 2016. So since then, we have been raising awareness and funds for the plight of the people in the Horn of Africa. Our field offices in Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Sudan are assisting families by providing water, food, non-food items, and shelter materials since the beginning of this campaign. We have delivered over 130,000 food to over 130,000 people and dug about 93 water wells just since this campaign started across the region. We also partnered with Feed My Starving Children, another Minnesotan organization, to provide specifically formulated food for malnourished children. About 270,000 meals, and there are about 1 million meals on the way to provide food for those children. I think the main lesson that we maybe should learn from this, and I think Senator Amy Klobuchar already mentioned that, is that the main lesson we learned from previous famines is that early intervention is really critical. It's not only it saves lives, but also it's more cost effective. And the best way to help refugees are actually to keep them not to be refugees. I think you mentioned that. Just helping people to be in their homes. Right now we have in Mogadishu, in the suburb of Mogadishu, for those who have been displaced from the rural area, we have a camp that's set in Mogadishu, and we are helping set latrines there, providing them with food and water. This is only in South Somalia. We have also another operation in the north part of Somalia. Actually, we have 2 field offices in Somalia. This is in addition to we also an effort going on in Sudan for Sudanese who are coming to the border to Sudan, basically, trying also to provide them with food. I would like to say that the best way for those people who would like to help, the best way and the fastest way actually to help during a time of famine is monetary fund. This enable organization like ours, ARC and others, to really mobilize our offices and provide food in a timely manner. Again, just we need to remember that at least half of the people who died in 2011 were children under the age of 5. So we don't want that to happen again.
Thank you so much for your work. Thank you. Michelle Brock is the Executive Director of the Cargill Foundation.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here to be part of this conversation, and I do want to start by thanking Senator Klobuchar and Representative Emmer for your extraordinary leadership, because it's going to take really good policy. This isn't about politics, it's about good policy, and we want to continue advocating for continued support by the U.S. government for U.S. foreign assistance. It's critical to our business and helps protect companies licensed to operate in countries. We need stable governments, we need stable places to work and grow, provide markets for farmers, etc. And so these policies are really, really important, and we certainly stand with you and support that. Cargill was a significant supporter for the continuation of the Global Food Security Act as well, which helps to enable the continued support for many of the terrific programs that have been led by USAID and other government agencies to address long-term food security, which again is just so critical. So thank you very much for your leadership, and Daniel, thank you for hosting us today. So for those of you who don't know, Cargill is a fairly sizable food and agriculture company. We work in 70 countries and 150,000 employees. What we do every day is move food from areas of surplus to deficit, so issues around food security, hunger are critical to our company. Our purpose is to be a global leader in nourishing the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. So you might see why issues around famine and severe hunger are critical to our company. It's also personal. Cargill is headquartered here, again, where we have such a strong East African population, some of whom are Cargill employees. We have employees around this country, but also around the world who have families that are suffering. We had one employee who's in our Geneva office who had to leave Somalia a number of years ago due to the conflict and the situation there. And she's worked just personally to try to raise funds from employees in her office to try to support her family back home. It's very, very personal to us and also to our employees. So I want to talk a little bit about what it is we do. Cargill works to address immediate crises like this. So certainly we provide our financial support to organizations like the World Food Program, who often is a lead agency in trying to provide food in crises like this. So immediately Cargill gave a grant to help expand our multi-million-dollar partnership with the World Food Program so that they could get food where it's needed again to meet, I think, those very immediate needs. We also support CARE, which is an organization that we worked with for many, many years on addressing long-term solutions to food security. They're working actively in Somalia and parts of northern Kenya as well to ensure access to water, both for people who need it immediately and also for agriculture. We're seeing crop failure, the inability to provide water for livestock as well. So that just perpetuates the situation. And so that real immediate support is key. We partnered with other companies, some competitors, some other food industry partners to provide that support to the World Food Program. So that's certainly ongoing. But I don't want to lose sight of the importance of long-term solutions to food security as well, because if we can prevent famine, prevent crises like this, that's even more important as we look to go forward. And so Cargill provides farmer training to organizations. We help farmers provide access to markets for those farmers, and we do that largely in partnership with USAID and other organizations. And so funding for USAID is critical. We can't say that enough. They've been a tremendous partner in helping businesses grow and be able to operate effectively. They help provide some of the missing links in the global food system. And so our work with them and with other NGOs on the ground is key, certainly to our business success, but to meeting both the emergency and long-term solutions to food security that we're talking about today. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Adir Zak Abdi, I always really liked the name Adir Zak because when I got elected to the Senate, we were looking at public schools out in Arlington, and one of the principals says, well, the schools in Arlington are very diverse, to my 6th grade daughter. And she was in a school with all Hmong and Somali kids in Minnesota, and she looked at this principal who is 6'3", and she says, the most common boy's name in my class is Adir Zak. So thank you so much, a board member at Reed Horn of Africa, and thank you. And maybe you want to focus a little on what's happening in the rural areas of Somalia.
Let me first of all thank you, Senator Amy Klobuchar and Representative Tom Emmer for taking the leadership on this role, and also Danielle and the ARC for hosting us. I think it's very befitting for our government leaders to really be the forefront of this. Not only is Minnesota, the place that has the largest, I would say actually outside of Africa, probably the largest East African population in one state. In fact, the fact of the matter is every single family that is in the Twin Cities of East African origin is in one way or another impacted by what's going on in the Horn of Africa. I've actually had the unfortunate experience of having to call a friend whose father actually died as a result of the drought and the famine that's happening in Somalia. He was in a small town, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of people that are leaving the rural areas, the nomadic families, who are coming into small towns where the water is very scarce, where the food is scarce, and so there's diseases that are coming up. And he actually died as a result of a waterborne disease. So it's impacting us. If it's not impacting an immediate family member, it's impacting a relative. If it's not impacting a relative that you know, it's impacting a neighbor of a family who is in Somalia. So this is a huge issue for our community, and again, I want to thank our government leaders for really taking a leadership on this and bringing voices to this issue. Just to say a little bit about our organization. So our organization is primarily development focused. We really had small beginnings. Back in 2000 is when our efforts started, and it was about a decade after the Civil War started, and there wasn't really much progress in sight in Somalia. So people in the diaspora were thinking, what can we do to give back? What initiatives can we take on? So we started a very small project in a rural town and opened a school with about 75 students. And now, many years later, our projects have expanded. We provide schooling support to over close to actually 2,000 children in rural areas. We've had the fortune of actually developing water wells and water resources in rural towns. And those long-term projects are really having a major impact today because people in the rural areas, now that there's a drought, they're coming into small towns. And the nearest place that they will go to is where they can find water. And so investments in things like that, long-term solutions where people can find water have been really key for us. We also work in supporting clinics. In Somalia, we've actually built a few clinics in rural towns as well. So our primary focus has been development. However, the famine and the droughts are reoccurring, and they're happening every time. And every organization that's able to provide any type of support has to respond to what's happening. So we've been working on supporting, especially the rural areas, the rural communities, with food and water. That's been the primary focus for us. And the families that we're working with are really people who are from nomadic communities in central and northeastern Somalia. These families have basically lost everything that they've had. All they really had is their livestock. And as a result of the drought, those have perished. So they have nothing else to do but go to the closest town that they can find. And if you go to these small towns, you'll see makeshift camps that are popping up, in the outskirts of these towns. And these people have lost everything that they've had. And so it is really organizations like us, organizations like ARAHA and ARC in throughout the world that have to really provide support to these communities. Like I said, they've lost everything. As Mohammed mentioned, what we should be trying to do is preventing them from really becoming refugees. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is that's in fact what's happening. They're internally displaced, and they are refugees almost within their own country. They've lost everything, and now they're just waiting for support. So it is a very unfortunate situation that's happening there. And I think, in addition to focusing on the immediate need of what's happening, we have to do that. We have to provide support, but we also have to really think about long-term solutions and sustainable ways to if not prevent what's happening now, to think about how we can lessen the impact in the future. And the rural communities that we're working with, I think, are the ones that are mostly impacted, not only because of their livelihood source and what they rely on, but also because it's really hard for aid to reach them. They're very rural, they're very far, they're off roads, and so getting support to them is more difficult, but it's also more critical because there's not a lot of organizations that are reaching there. So that's been our primary focus. The diaspora community, I really want to commend the work that people have been doing here in Minnesota and throughout the states as well. We've seen, as Senator Amy mentioned, young leaders like Levan and Khalid who've raised thousands of dollars. Now the restaurants have. We have Khalid. Yep. And so usually where you see one, the other is there, but today we really have Khalid. And they've done really amazing work. I also went to Ohio and actually met with young leaders like these guys who've also raised funds, and they're going door to door on the weekends, and finding $100 here, a couple $100 there, and saying how many families can we support. So the community has really, taken up the situation and doing everything that they can. I think now what we need, and what I would stress is for our corporate partners, for large organizations that can really have a bigger impact to take a role, and for our government to also continue to push for having, elevating the issue and making sure that it's appropriately addressed. And I thank Senator Amy and Representative Tom for leading that effort. Thank you.
With Project for Private Living, and there's a mental health advocate there, and also a member of the Somali American Task Force.
Good morning. You guys hear me? I see a pattern here. There is the nonprofits, and then there's elected officials, and I'm the odd one out. My name is Farhan Hassan. I want to thank Daniel for hosting us. I also want to thank Amy Klobuchar and Tom Emmer for taking the lead on this. I got to tell you, I was very involved in the 2011 famine. I'm not so much involved in this one because of personal reasons, but I was really furious that not enough attention has been given to this. And when we talk about famine, and when you hear the numbers, and people dying, sometimes it's it's easy to just think about the numbers and not the people, because once you start thinking about the people themselves, then it messes with your head. And I work in the mental health field, so I know that. So what is really happening in Somalia or the Horn of Africa, the region in the Somali region in Ethiopia is also affected. The Somali region in Kenya is also affected. Somalia, the country itself, is also affected. It's unfortunate. Could have been prevented, but like the senator said, we don't want to blame people. We just want to find solutions. But I really want to emphasize the solutions cannot be just putting a bandage on the problem. The solutions have to be sustainable. They have to be long-lasting. We have to change. When I was drinking this water and we were talking about the famine, I was just, thinking about the importance of water. That's the problem. The problem is there's not enough water. That's it. There's not enough water. Crops are not growing. Animals don't have water to drink. People don't have water to drink. And then to add more fuel to the fire, there is the disease that's happening in some parts of the Horn of Africa right now, which is the bacterial infection cholera, which, if people don't find help in the first 24 to 48 hours, the appropriate help, they could die. It's an infectious disease, and how you get it is that if the water is contaminated or the food is contaminated with that bacteria, you get it. It's very infectious. People spread it easily, and people are dying. It's for something that it's not a big deal in here. Like, you get something like that, you go to the ER, they give you IV and maybe some sort of some way to get your electrolytes balanced, and that's it. But people are dying, and dozens of people are dying at each day because of that disease. So I'm really honored to be here. I don't know what more I could add that other people haven't said, the people that are working on the ground, the elected officials. But what I really want to emphasize is that the solutions cannot be that we bring food. We deliver food, okay? So let's deliver food and medical supplies. But what happens tomorrow? What happens, when this comes back? So we need some serious thinking, and we need to think outside of the box on creative solutions on how to have enough water in the Horn of Africa, how to have enough sustainable resources and strategies to build sustainable resources so people can depend on themselves and not on the aid.
And that's a very good thought, and I know that's what, thank you. Some of the work that's going on with agriculture, with trying to find drought-resistant seeds and doing this kind of work is going to be really important so people can make a living. And then I also think the political conflicts, we have a new head of state there in Somalia. We finally have an ambassador from the U.S. and we've opened the embassy here. Tom and I were both around for that. And so the political conflicts, as well as getting the economy adjusted to the new reality, then if it is adapting to this warmer climate, has to happen as well. So Tom knows our next guest.
I do. Haji Youssef is the founding director, I guess would be the title, of Mid-Mill USA, but he's also a strong voice in one of the biggest communities in the district I represent in central Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota. So we're happy to have Haji with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My 6th Congressional Congressman Tom Emmer. I just have to say that before I say thank you to Tom.
And I will add, thank you very much to my friend, Haji Youssef.
But on a serious note, I would like to thank Amy, Senator Amy Klobuchar, Daniel Wordsworth, and the visitor, Tom Emmer, Congressman, and myself from St. Cloud. Mostly people in rural areas get ignored on important issues. But this is a very serious issue. Twofold. First of all, let me talk about Minimo. Minimo aim is to connect with everybody on a local level, to national and international level, to find solutions to some of these problems that are affecting our part of the world, and more so even the whole world. And how do we work with every stakeholder to deal with these issues of food security, terrorism, and international relations. At a time when our country, people are doubting us as a country, we need a message that comes from us as Americans, regardless of our religion, our cultural background, our identity, our skin color. We as individuals like Liban and Khalid have done, a self-initiative to do something about it. We need to come together and find and show the world that America is more than just a party, it's more than just an individual, that it's a country that welcomes people regardless of their faith, regardless of who they are and where they come from. It's a place we all share. And coming together and sharing this and doing work together and dealing with issue, all common action together. I think that's very important. And also talking about security and terrorism, those things are very much related, especially there is a huge population of Somalis in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and Somalia, and there are refugee camps in many places. And recently there was a report that I saw online that talked about groups like Al-Shabaab actually parading food and items and using that as an initiative to recruit, either to recruit or to cause much insecurity in many parts of Somalia. And Somalis are victims of terrorism. A lot of people really have to understand. Most Somalis die of terrorism. Most Somalis may become either disabled or either get affected by terrorism. Somalis in nature are also nomadic. They don't stay in one place. They move culturally. They move from one area to another, looking for the rainy seasons, going to find that. And so these two are very important and they're very much related. And for the security of our nation here in the US, and I'm going to speak as an American because I am an American. And I want a positive image of America and what this country is all about that is really available to communities that are being affected by this drought and terrorism. Should be very much visible. Most of the time we do stuff and nobody knows what America does. The only negative thing we hear is force. But I honestly, me myself, being American and being part of this country and the beauty and the diversity it has represented and the opportunity that it has given me, I think it's important that most of us as Americans do translate that in many other parts of East Africa, in many parts of the world, and show that we are a country that actually is doing something, that not all of us just one way or another, but that we do share and do care for the security of this country. So we're working with many stakeholders, we're working with many organizations to give and also amplify those voices, and not only just on Stans County, Benton County, Sherman County, but also on national and state level, national level, and international level.
Has a question, and maybe you all do. I guess I'd ask one question of Daniel, and that's just these cuts that Tom and I referenced, the proposed cuts. They haven't happened yet, but of the nearly 30%, the State Department, it would be over $17 billion when you add in the USAID and the State Department cuts, and just what effect do you think this would have on dealing with droughts and famines like the one we're talking about?
Thank you, and thanks to everybody. I've really enjoyed, I've really absorbed a lot of what you've been saying, quite moving with many parts, but I'm really sorry about your friend. That's just a dreadful thing to have happen, so sorry. I think, that we have this sort of real challenge, right, which is that we, recognizing the leadership that want to bring about cuts and other things, and we have to recognize that as a reality, but at the same time we have to absorb what that means for poor people. And there is a direct line relationship between these kinds of cuts and the people on the ground that are affected by them. It's a true direct line relationship. USAID today is funding work in Nigeria, Yemen, in South Sudan, in Uganda, in Somalia, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, it is directly responding to this famine. And so by reducing their funding, we are reducing their ability to be able to translate that into day-to-day change in those environments. And also, I think what you have happen in those areas is these are all regional issues, and so the US needs a strong, not just aid response, but actually a strong diplomatic response with those governments. We need to have our ambassadors actively engaged with the leaders of every one of those countries. South Sudan's a great example of this. You know, there's a major political, what's happening there is centered on a political issue. The US can take real leadership on that. And so by removing people's ability to respond to that, it does have a direct impact, and it's very real. And I think that's one of the, I think it's an advantage that we have. I think we've all alluded to this fact. So for us living in Minnesota, it becomes a very personal thing because our own friends and our own family are affected by that. And so we see it as a very, very...
There's been such momentum in establishing public-private partnerships over the last few years, and so others are providing. There's also been a lot of technical expertise that's gone into many of these partnerships, and so transferring skills across borders is really, really important. So when we talk about reducing support for these very important programs, we're talking about reducing the ability for us to do that as well. Senator Klobuchar mentioned a program that we have with General Mills. It's called Partners in Food Solutions. And the whole intent of that is how do we get expertise out of the food scientists and leaders here and take that over to the continent of Africa and help a growing population. So there's certainly immediate concerns to these cuts as well as long-term.
And that's been one of the hallmarks of Rasha, who led USAID for so long. He was just working much better with the private sector and then also with religious groups, which hadn't been happening, and it really won the respect of some conservatives in the U.S. Senate, like Senator Inhofe, Senator Enzi, and others who've long been interested in Africa, and it really made a big difference in their willingness to keep funding USAID. And so this progress has been made to do more with partnerships and not just rely on government money, and so we don't want to step back from that.
And as the State Department was explaining it to Daniel's point, you have these cuts, but you always have to look at how to do this better. And USAID, I think, has, through the State Department, their initiative has changed over the years. It used to be more delivering a lump sum of whatever it is to today, it's more teach. And I think this is to Haran's point. What about tomorrow? We do have an emergency today, but how are we going to take care of the long term? How are we going to it's probably to Mohammed and I'm from Little Delano, we got to work at that. But I think it's to both of you, because as this is changing and we're looking for efficiencies and we're trying to meet this obligation, I think it was Haji who talked about Al-Shabaab stepping in and interrupting the flow of aid when we are able to do it. Give us some challenges that you've seen and how you've dealt with them, and maybe how powerful for the aid that's so necessary and how it can be delivered and we can ensure that it gets to where we need it to go.
Our own national, not anymore that we can say if there's a famine in some area or some humanitarian crisis somewhere, it's a problem of others. It's actually is going to be our problem if we don't involve. The world is so interconnected today that if we don't involve and have early intervention, we will be paying, we will be affected. I mean, the best example when in West Africa, when Ebola hit Sierra Leone, Liberia, our citizens not reduce or not any significant reduction in the government spending, but it really will impact hugely the life of other people. So that connection is important. Another connection that I would like also to mention here is that actually every time we help people while they are in their neighborhood and their villages and we prevent that, we are preventing the cycle of having new refugees that is going to be, their life will be changed forever. For 50 years, that is about what, 25 years? this is like almost like one generation, two generation people are there. Actually, it's for our own self-interest to help prevent those people from leaving their homes. That's something sometimes we miss that link between our own national security, our own global development, our own national security, and the development of other or the solving the problem of others. So that's link that really it's important that especially you as a government, our own problem here at home. That's the point that I just want to make the point.